In Parshat Trumah, God says to Moses, share your inspiration about building me a holy place in which to dwell among the children of Israel. And I will not only be a physical presence amidst the camp, I will dwell betocham. I will dwell amongst them. Not just within it, the tabernacle, the portable tent of meeting, the sacred shrine that the Israelites would build in the wilderness, but Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. If they will build me this portable tabernacle, I will dwell within them. Now we know that I will dwell within it, is also specified when Moses, in God's name, calls for specified gifts to create that tabernacle in chapter 25 of Exodus. God spoke to Moses and told him, speak to the children of Israel so that they may take for me offerings, gifts, from every person whose heart is moved. So you shall receive my offering. This is the list of gifts that I hope we'll receive. Gold, silver, bronze, violet, purple, scarlet threads, linen, goat's hair, tanned hides of rams, leather, acacia wood, oil for a lampstand, spices for the anointing oil, incense of spices, onyx stones, and stones for setting in the ephod, the special garments, and in the breastpiece. They will make for me a sanctuary, Vasuli mikdash, v'shachanti bitocham. I will dwell in their midst. I will dwell, as the Hasidic commentaries say, in their hearts. The level of holiness and divinity will be raised through having a physical location for God's presence in the ancient Israelite camp. Now, it had been for generations that patriarchs, our elders, Moses's and Aaron's and Miriam's elders, had built altars for burnt offerings and set up sacred memorial pillars. This was quite a different project, the Mishkan that they called for. The tabernacle was unlike the altars and pillars of the ancient generations. Noah built an altar to God even before the Jewish people. Noah demonstrated how to both extend his humanity towards his family and the family of animals on earth, and come and create an altar to make offerings and show gratitude towards God. Avram built an altar to Adonai at the Oaks of Mamre in chapter 13 of Genesis. His son Isaac built an altar to God in Beersheba upon hearing the ancestral covenant repeated by God in Genesis 26. Isaac's son Jacob memorialized the divine presence 4 separate times, each with a name. Now this stone that I set up as memorial pillar will be called Beit El, the house of God. These altars and pillars began the physical encounter spaces that the Israelites would create. But Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, with the Israelites, would start on a different kind of project. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, was a different kind of shrine. It was a building that housed the holiness, the presence of God, known as Shekhinah, known as the indwelling presence of God. Could they have just used wilderness nature to seek inspiration? Moses, of course, had encountered God at a burning bush. Would it not have been that fires themselves alone could be the inspiration? Instead, Moses shares his inspiration with the people. We shall build a Mishkan. We shall take our most precious metals, gold and silver and bronze. We will take our wonderful weavings. We will bring spices. We will bring precious stones. Now, despite what the Israelites took with them from Egypt, in chapter 12, it describes the Israelites borrowing or taking even from the Egyptians they left. Scholars believe that the Israelites would not have had all of the material wealth that was called for in Parshat Trumah in chapter 25 of Exodus. So allow me to share some of that scholarship before we return to the spiritual message of Torah, even if scholarship has us asking some very technical questions. The question of whether or not they had the materials leads scholars to believe that the elaborate tabernacle in the book of Exodus was probably based on a later structure, either the tent or tabernacle that was set up for the Ark of the Covenant in Shiloh, as read about in the books of prophets, or that it was even based on the first temple itself in David and Solomon's kingdom. What rationale would the biblical authors have had to share this elaborate tabernacle structure? Here's what scholars suggest the author's intentions might have been. Well, we don't have any living witnesses to what the wilderness tabernacle looked like, but it must have been a grand structure like the structure that we know in our midst. Taking from their own religious spaces, they project back on the wilderness structure itself. For 5 chapters in the book of Exodus, God gave Moses the explicit patterns and instructions for furnishings and the floor plan for the tabernacle in the wilderness. It is this detailed description over 5 chapters that is the link in the chain between the ancient sacred space and whichever sacred space that our later ancestors used to call upon the divine presence. What does an ancient tent of meeting have in common with the shrine at Shiloh or the first temple itself in Jerusalem? They are all sacred spaces. The pattern described in Exodus describes our sacred architectural understandings and leanings, not only as Jews, but as people the world over. It describes a pattern of building sacred space that moves from the most innermost sanctuary to the outer courtyards, from the most sacred furnishings to the most accessible ones. The blueprint specifies in Exodus a portable sanctuary, even if that sanctuary in its architectural type, spiritual architectural type, is created more permanently in later history. We as human beings seek sacred architectural spaces that draw us from the outer doorways, hallways, passageways, and accessible furnishings to the innermost sanctuaries, into the most sacred, holiest inner dimensions. And this is why, world over, such sacred space invites the presence of the divine and worshipers. Moses will return from Sinai with the plans for the sacred space the Israelites should build in order to draw God's presence closer. Despite the fact that the Israelites will sin with the golden calf, the instructions for our tabernacle are repeated again after Exodus goes through the description of the Israelites' sinful behavior and seeming separation from God. In order to reconnect with divinity, in order to reconnect with Kedusha, with holiness, the Israelites must concentrate on erecting their sacred space, creating a sanctuary in which the divine presence can dwell and communication from heaven can spread not only to their teacher, but to all Israelites in the camp. Why the details in Exodus 25 of the gold and the silver, the copper, the bronze, the sacred stones, the gems and the incense, the wonderful spices? Why all the riches of the ancient world listed? In a sense, the tabernacle not only calls upon us to center ourselves in godliness and the divine covenant, but also encourages us to realize that the gifts of our physical world can truly be elevated. Using our most precious resources, using our wealth individually, kol asher yidvenu libo, anyone whose heart stirs can elevate wealth and riches and share it with the community in order to create sacred space and divine pursuits. The Alshich on the Torah in the book of Leviticus says that we should not see ourselves as giving gifts to the Lord or even true gifts to the poor, but that it is Trumah, that it is from the verb liromem, laharim, that is to lift up. We are lifting from our possessions, yes, but these possessions are only borrowed, loaned to us while we enjoy our lives so that we can elevate them for holy purposes, for sacred architecture, for the purpose of creating holy community. This is what the tabernacle helped establish in the wilderness. This is what the shrine at Shiloh did, and this is what Solomon's holy temple in Jerusalem did as well. We are blessed to have riches, wealth, silver, gold, precious stones, and we are also granted the holy opportunity to share them, to laharim, to make trumot, to contribute tzedakah, and to lift the possibilities in our world based on the sharing of our wealth from our material fortunes. Shabbat Shalom.